My name is Benga Adjulori. I'm a senior economist at the Center for American Progress. I'm also the past president of the National Economic Association, and I'm honored to be here with the founders of the National Economic Association. What I'm going to have is kind of talk about reflections on the history of the NEA, some of their experiences, and then also kind of talk about the future. But first, I want to say, just ask them what you think the legacy in your eyes of what the NEA is, and then also to introduce yourselves too. Thank you.
Well, the most important thing for us to realize is that the NEA is the foremost accomplishment of UCLA in leveraging the capability, professional capability in our community to stimulate others.
Introduce yourself.
Pardon?
To introduce yourself also. Introduce
Yeah.
yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. Keep that. I can't say that again. I don't remember. But anyway, I'm Charles Z. Wilson. My main background is, and particularly with respect to the NEA, I was a vice chancellor for academic programs for 8 years at UCLA. And it's during that period that the movement of blacks into professional organizations and also encouraging other groups to grow was stimulated from UCLA. Not only do we have the notion that we could generate leadership from a university, we had support from Charles Hitch. Charles Hitch lasts for about 3 years before he resigned, but his seeds were planted in the university already. His statement was essentially, we must do for the cities what we did for agriculture. And nobody has a more successful story of how we converted the land and the technology and the supposedly be the charge of our land-grant universities to make the welfare of the state maximize. Berkeley came out of that. We had families that came in from our centers. University Extension was all over the state. So we had a model in California that encouraged us to think big about changing the problems, and making the problems in the states regarding minorities as being linked to the urbanization versus the rural. It wasn't that we didn't care about the rural, but the primary animal that we were dealing with was a wildness that was taking place in terms of our cities, particularly with respect to poor people. And as you can see today, you go to New York, you go to LA, you go to San Francisco, by our failure to grab a model that could bring along the people in the inner city areas, we now have major, major problems in this country. The leadership had to be in our cities. So when I was at UCLA, I heard that sermon going over the RAND. I enjoyed being an economist and being around smart thinking economists. You know, so we were really into what we're going to do about our cities. And the black communities, because we had started the movement, the first black kid to be killed on a college campus was at Jackson State. Under my watch, I was there for the president to help get the study group started at Jackson State versus State University of New York. And I'd taken down 7 professors, speech, English, science, and so on, and we were going to work out a relationship. That night, something stupid happened. I'm sitting up and eating dinner, and one of our kids got killed by a cop. That, to me, was a fire that went around the nation. That was what happened. From that point on, the student movement started. And of course, the student movement exposed everything for us. So the NEA reflects the anguish and the urgency of trying to move from a academic world where we had tremendous capability in our med schools and in our professional schools to bring about solutions that would lead to something in our inner cities, and particularly for blacks, and hopefully we could spread that around others.
I had a very interesting experience in coming to attend the meeting on Sunday morning, December, I forget the date, maybe December 28th, maybe it was, 1969. Let me tell you about that. At the end of the 8 o'clock session that was chaired by Professor Phyllis A. Wallace, who was the African-American woman professor at the Sloan School at MIT, where 3 papers were presented on the issue of increasing, I think, African-American, we would call black people at that time. That was in the era of the Black Power movement. And C.Z. Wilson seized the microphone. He went to the podium at the end of the session, seized the microphone, and announced that following the meeting, there would be a meeting in his room, 1423, at the New York Hilton Hotel to discuss the organization of a group to address participation of black people in the economics profession. Now, I was sitting next to my former professor and mentor, Andrew F. Brimmer. 7 months earlier, I had just been conferred the PhD degree in economics at the University of Pennsylvania and had been hired as an assistant professor in the Wharton School. There is some historic significance in that because Andrew Brimmer, earlier, about 6 or 7 years earlier, had been the first African American ever to teach in the Wharton School. I was the second. Brimmer did not stay long enough to earn tenure. He was captured away by Washington, and at the time of the meeting in New York, was a member of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, first African American to serve in that position. So Andy turned to his left and said to me, "Now, Bernie, you know, I can't attend that meeting. I want you to go and report back to me." Brimmer was still treating me as a graduate student, despite the fact that I was a professor comparable to him, though not comparable to him, but comparable to him. So I dutifully followed his direction, and I went to the meeting. In fact, I rose on the elevator. I was on the same elevator with, I think his name was Chalmers. He was a professor at Howard University, professor of economics at Howard University. And he did not remember the name of the room, so he asked me. I had never met him. But there were so few African Americans, we assumed we were going to the same meeting. So I told him, and we walked together to the meeting. I entered that meeting, and there I met C.Z. Wilson, Thad Spratlin, Carl Gregory, Richard F. America, and it turns out that Dick America and I grew up together in Philadelphia, but I had never met him. I was familiar with the name because I had read his article in the Harvard Business Review entitled, "What Do You People Want?" And then there was also Robert Brown and a number of others. I had not met any of them before. And shortly after the group gathered, CZ gave the charge, similar to the remarks he made this afternoon in the luncheon. And I was gripped by what he said in his statement, because I entered economics because of an interest in racial inequality in American economic life. I attended a small church-related college in North Carolina, Livingstone College, which was founded by my church, the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, and studied economics because when I met with the counselor who met with all of the freshmen to decide what their major would be, I didn't know what I wanted to major in. She said, well, what are you interested in? And I told her about a story that I experienced when I was growing up in South Philadelphia in the 7th Ward, which is the area that W.E.B. Du Bois studied for his classic study of the Philadelphia Negro. I had relatives who lived in the 7th Ward in the late 19th century. I didn't live there at that time. A relative lived there. And we would go to the 9th Street Italian Market. I must have been 10 or 11 years old at the time. And in the Italian market, which was an open-air market selling fruits and vegetables and meats and clothing and that sort of thing, I noticed that black people, who were at least 50% of the customers, had less money to spend than white people. I noticed that they not only had less money to spend, but their spending habits were different from that of white people. For example, when a black person approached the meat store, they would look in the case and always ask the price of the product before they would make the purchase. And then typically they would purchase a small quantity of the product based upon the price. The white customers, on the other hand, would say exactly what they wanted, the kind of meat they wanted to buy. And they typically bought the more expensive meats, like T-bone steaks and tuck steaks and that sort of thing. And that was of interest to me. Why is it that black people who have the same desires for purchases and so forth spent their money differently, and why did they have less money than white people? There was also the chicken store at the end of 9th and Washington Avenue, where the trains used to run. It was a district area with warehouses and so forth. And most of the customers in the Giordano's chicken store were black people. And one would choose a live chicken. They would cut the head off, send the chicken through a machine that would take the feathers off and sell you the ticket. I also noticed in the purchase of clothing that typically the black people frequented the discount clothing shops, where white people typically purchased their clothes in the higher grade clothing shops on 6th Street. And these were the kind of differences that I noticed in the spending patterns of black people and white people. Most of the whites were Italians, Irish, Jewish, because that was the nature of the neighborhood. And these kinds of questions interested me. What explains these differences? So when I went to college and I was asked by the counselor, what do you want to major in? And told her this story, she said, well, if you're interested in those questions, you should study economics. So I dutifully studied economics. Now, it is interesting that the man who taught economics at Livingstone College earned a master's degree in economics from Harvard University under Professor John D. Black, the same man in the same program that Barack Obama's father studied for his master's degree in economics at Harvard. And he taught economics using notes that he took in class at Harvard. This was the type of education I received in this small black college in North Carolina. As a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, I took every course that they offered in economics and made an A in every one of them. So the long and short of it is that I studied economics because of this interest in racial inequality in American economic life, learning that it was broad, it is deep, and it is persistent. So when I went to the meeting and heard C.Z. Wilson articulate why this meeting was held, I said, this is what I've been waiting for. This is an opportunity for me to do something about this problem. And at that time, of course, I had attended AEA meetings since I was a graduate student, because Andrew Rimmer demanded that I attend the meetings, and in fact, he would pay my transportation to the AEA meetings as a graduate student. And in those meetings, there's another link to this. At that time, there were several African-American economists working in Washington. One was Samuel Z. Westerfield, who was Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. And Westerfield would roam the halls. There were very, very few black people who attended the meetings in those days. And when Westerfield would see a dark face, he would introduce himself and tell the person who he was and ask what that person, what their plans were for a career. And if you had earned your doctorate or you were a graduate student working on your doctorate, he would give you his card and say, contact me, because he was recruiting black people for the economics jobs in Washington. Jobs were opening up for black people with degrees in economics in those days. So all of that led me, and when I heard the comments made by Marcus Alexis and Carl Gregory, Thad didn't say much in those meetings, but when he spoke in his basso profundo voice, and he spoke with great feeling and experience about the race issue. The question was the race issue in the economics department. So those are some of my reflections on why I became involved in it, and I stuck with it over time. And one of the experiences that I have had, which was promoted and stimulated by meeting these men, Marcus Alexis and the rest of them, was the opportunity to work with other black economists who had similar interests. One of those interests was mentioned by Carl this afternoon, and that was the meetings we had, few of us, at the Black Economic Research Center in Harlem that was headed by Robert Brown. And we put together the Economic Bill of Rights, do you remember that? For all Americans, not for black Americans, an Economic Bill of Rights for all Americans, and each of us did a chapter on a topic. I did the chapter on employment. I'm a labor economist. And we would discuss that. And Marcus was asked to present that to Jesse Jackson so he could present the work to the platform committees of the Democratic and Republican Party. Well, he never did that. I don't know what he did with the studies. We finally published it in the Review of Black Political Economy. But the other experience that I've had, and I'd say this because the opportunity to meet these men greatly enriched my life and gave me an opportunity to do something with economics beyond just teach courses and write scholarly papers. I did that too, but this was an outlet for me to be active in addressing the issue that got me into economics in the first place. One of those opportunities came when Bob Brown called me one afternoon, I think it was a Tuesday or Wednesday, and said, "Bernie, can you go with me to Washington on Saturday to meet with Congressman Augustus Hawkins?" Augustus Hawkins was a black congressman from Los Angeles who was the chairman of the House Education and Labor Committee, major committee dealing with labor topics and other topics in the education and labor field. Hawkins was developing a piece of legislation called the Full Employment and Equal Opportunity Act of 1971. This was just 2 years after the meeting that I referred to. So I said, yeah, I can join you. So I took the Metroliner from Philadelphia to Washington, met Bob Brown in Union Station, and we went together to Gus Hawkins' office. To make a long story short, Bob Brown and I were the two black economists advising Gus Hawkins on the development of legislation to produce full employment in the United States. That legislation later became the Humphrey Hawkins Full Employment Act, which after some revisions in the Congress offered by Senator Proxmire of Wisconsin, became the Balanced Growth and Full Employment Act of 1978. It took that long to get it through, which is the principal economic growth policy of this country today. So I say that in order to say that I hope that going forward, the members of the NEA as economists won't just spend their time teaching courses and writing papers and working toward tenure, but that they will use their association with other black economists through the NEA to move forward and strive for an impact on public policy that will address racial inequality in American economic life. I'll stop there because I'm very interested in the reflections of my colleagues. Thank you.
The reason I became an economist was similar. I was very conscious of the lower relative status of African Americans in the US, and I wanted to impact that. And I wanted to major in the subject that would empower me most to do that. And since there's such a material value in the ways that one gets ahead in the United States, it's your financial standing, your educational level, your handling of assets is very related to your personal mobility. And more important than that for me is that it's related to your ability to help others and pull up others in your community. So I, like Bernard, decided on becoming an economist But let me go earlier than Bernard in why this organization was so important to found, why there's such a need to develop an organization like this. As a graduate student in the early 60s at Wayne State and later at the University of Michigan working a doctorate, I also attended meetings of the American Economic Association here this year, but which meets every year around this time at different large cities in the nation. And it's a place where economists get to know each other, get to hear leading research, get to be inspired by others, get to know others who are doing path-breaking work. And I noticed that there were very few people that looked like me. And I started trying to find out, how does one advance as an economist? How does one get good jobs and so on? And the answer is that you first get a good education, and then you write scholarly articles. You get a lot of exposure where others can see the quality of your work, and that leads to getting good jobs and promotions and so on. But one of the big avenues for getting promotions is appearing at economic conventions like this, where people can see you and the quality of the work you do. And I would look at the conventions and I would see very few people who looked like me. And the ones that I saw were already established, doing their own things primarily. So I decided that I was going to try to get affiliated with others so we could change the system where one can be invited to present their research, one could get invitations to appear in panels, one could be discussants while others were giving papers and so on. And since a lot of decisions were made by whites who had the higher ranking position and so on, there's very little invitations to blacks to appear in these panels. And these panels are presented by organizations. And we didn't have an organization of black economists at that time. So that makes what Bernard spoke about as what led to the formation since the NEA so important. So I was very glad to participate with the other founders here in organizing this. And little did I believe when this was founded in 69 and 70 that 50 years from then I would be here honored with other founders here. And that what's more, and this brought me to tears, I looked around the audience and I saw these young black economists. You know, I listened to them present papers and critique other papers. And they were as good as we were, if not better. And it was a fulfillment of a dream. And I'm so proud for my part in organizing this.
Yeah, I would guess in thinking of the Nea Legacy, I would make 3 points. That in its mission, NEA has always been about what I would call either ameliorating or responding to or reducing the impact of institutional racism and or adding to capacity building for doing the kinds of things that both Bernard and Carl suggested. So to me, the enduring legacy of what NEA has accomplished is all of the contributions. If you look at where economics would be, on issues of race. Matter of fact, the whole economics of racism, I think, wouldn't be where it is today if you didn't have the collective contributions from the Review of Black Political Economy and the contributors to it. So I think finding ways to continue that. On the capacity side, I would say finding ways to build the pipeline, because even though we continue the summer program, the pipeline is still thin. Just in conversation, a student of Bill Bradford, it mentioned that years ago, there were 30 students in the program. Now, I don't know what the current is, but the pipeline still, if you start with a relatively small number as undergrads that you're developing, and you look at all of the major universities and PhD programs, it's pretty hard to see breaking through in larger numbers. So NEA's work is going to be unending, and finding allies and other ways of really doing that. And I guess the other point that I would make is I think NEA offers a dual path that we will, I think, always need an NEA, no matter what opportunities and how much participation we have on programs, panels, even eventually becoming officers and whatever, that we need to be real, that our struggle is going to continue, because institutional racism is a part of the fabric of what we do.
Thank you. The NEA was born in the middle of the tumult of the 60s, grew out of the civil rights movement, and that spirit is fundamental to where we are today and the next generation or two. 4 quick points relating to what the organization can add to its outstanding and solid record built so far. Building institutions and continuing and deepening activism. I mentioned in my remarks earlier that the Review of Black Political Economy was intended, among other things, to have a policy impact. It's succeeded very well at being an academic platform for young and all other scholars, but either the review or some other mechanism, such as a blog or a newsletter, needs to be created that will intentionally, deliberately, strategically try to impact the direction of policy debate on the matters of priority to us in education and housing and employment, business development, and a couple of other broad policy areas. Related to that is the creation of a think tank. This has been discussed over the years, tabled, set aside. It might be timely now to pick that up again for the leadership of the organization and the membership broadly, to create a think tank, either freestanding or associated with any number of other Washington or New York or in other places, perhaps at some university, and in a partnership or affiliation of some kind, whatever is feasible, at whatever scale, but a active policy analysis institution that will carry on the work in that way. And related to that is the need for ongoing financial resources that are secure. So we need to think about building an endowment somehow. Easy to say, harder to do, but that's a challenge that the NEA might take on in its own best interest to build a modest endowment that can be there in good times and bad times. And finally, the fourth point, the economics departments at the historically black colleges and universities, about 100 of them, a handful of them are strong, many need help. And the NEA might take that on as a priority project, that we're going to work with 50, 60, 80 HBCUs for the next 10 or 15 years and help those departments become perhaps the strongest single department on that campus. Stronger than psychology or history or biology, whatever is in competition for student attention and resources. Let us decide that economics is going to be a brand differentiator at the HBCUs, that we're going to be known for having strong economics programs, whatever else they do. So those are a few concrete, I believe, realistic and achievable objectives for the next 20 to 50 years. And we'll all be here 50 years from now to celebrate those milestones. Thank you.
Yeah, that was nice.
I wanted to actually ask, hopefully get quick responses. I was ABD at the time of the formation of the NEA, and I blame Dick America for for introducing me to the caucus. And I guess the question that I have is that most of the time you think of these organizations, professional associations, as being very hierarchical. And so I guess that my question about the past and the future is, how did you see graduate students and junior faculty within the NEA? What did you see as both their role and their benefit? And therefore, what should the NEA think about now as we have not enough, but a growing number of junior faculty and graduate students within economics, people of color? How do we harness that energy without harming them in terms of their progress in the field, as Carl talked about the things that they have to do? So I'll pass it down, and anybody who wants to make a comment can do so. If you want to pass, that's fine too.
Well, I'll comment briefly on that. That economics, I don't have a PhD in economics. Somehow you guys allowed me to participate with my MBA because it was early days. It was the 1960s. There were only 15 or 20 of you with doctorates. So I fit in and made my contribution as best I could. I consider myself a policy analyst, which is kind of a fuzzy term. What's that mean? But that's how I consider the NEA, that it's economists and related policy analysts. So that means people teaching similar related fields in schools of public policy, in business schools, maybe in agricultural economics, and in other allied fields. And we might, to answer your question, be more proactive in how we reach out to people getting PhDs or in the pipeline, or even closely related degrees. It should be our policy, our practice, to initiate the contact and to extend ourselves to them as soon as we learn that they exist, that they're out there. And that could be the work of a committee whose job is to basically market the NEA.
Yeah, just a couple of points. One on resources that Richard mentioned, there's something we haven't talked about called the Black Economist Development Project that, again, CZ, through Ford Foundation and Peter DiGenosi, funded the 4 years of that. We had resources to do workshops. We developed graduate students because we knew that they were the future of the professoriate. So, and that just ended because the program and the project was not funded. But you need, as it was an ancillary kind of effort, but it had the resources of the Ford Foundation that really fostered that. So it seems to me that, again, considering what business model or what sustaining revenue base, so that that it becomes possible to grow your own. And we looked at graduate students as future members, which is happening on that.
There are several steps along the way from going from high school to college to graduate school and getting the PhD. Finally, you need to think through each of these steps and develop programs, and decide which way along the way is the critical bottleneck and give that priority, and then the next critical, and so on. One of the major limitations on students majoring in economics to begin with is the math requirements. That's what, in my experience, has weeded out most of the students. And they're good students, but when you come from low-income communities, low tax bases, homes that are fairly inexpensive, so the property tax does not enable a lot of support, it's very difficult to attract the teachers who are good at teaching math, because they tend to require more income than others and so on. So that's one step along. I don't know how we can impact that, but any program that increases the chances of hiring good math teachers that can deal in underprivileged neighborhoods and get students to do well, there can be support there. But above that, probably our strongest program is the summer program, where we take where we take students who are doing well, but who may be inclined to go in other ways, but are interested in economics, and we give them the tools to survive in tough graduate schools. We do that very well. In fact, a large number of the people in the audience today, the younger people, under 30 or 40 or 50 in some cases, they came through our program. And so I don't know that we can strengthen that if we can, but that's not the critical thing. We might also look at another step along the way, which is the getting the first job and the first 2 years as an assistant professor. What sort of things can we develop to help them move on much rapidly than just on their own? Is there anything we can provide? And those were the 3 stages that I would look at, but there may be others. But when we make a choice, though, is where we can make the maximum effort with the resources that we have. We can't work every way. We got to look at the biggest bang per buck.
Well, thank you very much. In responding to Margaret's question, I would make 3 points. One, I always saw the NEA as an antidote to the isolation I felt as a black economist in academia. That is, and you raise an interesting question. At that point in time, and to a considerable extent even today, those of us in the mainstream, that is, I won't say the mainstream, the non-HBCU context, are working almost in isolation from other black economists. I was the only black economist at the University of Pennsylvania. The second one arrived, he is Gerald Janes, arrived 5 years into my experience at the Wharton School. The difference was this. I was an economist in the Wharton School, not in the economics department. And we have a colleague, what's his name, Price, Gregory Price, who continues to say that, suggests, well, you're not an economist, you're not, that's nonsense. 60% of the faculty of the Wharton School are economists. They have PhD degrees in economics. Jerry was an assistant professor in the economics department. Regrettably, he did not get tenure. So after 5 years, he went to Yale, where in 2 years he did get tenure. I think Jerry Janes was the second African-American tenured professor at Yale University in the economics department. So the NEA offered me an opportunity to collaborate with, to gain sustenance from, and to learn from other black economists on issues of great importance to me, which was economic inequality in American economic life. The other thing is that with respect to the NEA's role with respect to graduate students or undergraduates, that was the pipeline, that is the Pipeline Summer Institute project, which Marcus Alexis developed. And I had early discussions with Marcus through the NEA, having met him and so forth, to discuss what might be done to achieve the first goal that was stated for the creation of the Caucus of Black Economists, and that was to increase the supply of black economists. And I am very grateful for the opportunity that I had when I was director for social sciences at the Rockefeller Foundation to collaborate with Marcus to develop that. He developed it, conceived of it, planned it, brought it to me at the Rockefeller Foundation for funding. Had I never met Marcus Alexis through the NEA, I don't think that opportunity would have been available. Because being an insider in a foundation where you have control over money made it possible to address the issue that you raise. You see, to support a pipeline of black people, men and women, who are interested in studying. You can encourage them to study economics. You can provide support for them through the summer program to increase their capacity to get through these graduate programs. Now, let me address the third point that you raised, and that is the mathematical requirement. That is a non-starter for me and has always been, because I am a devotee of institutional economics as a labor economist. All economists must have a capacity for quantitative analysis. But this nonsense of overemphasizing quantitative analysis and these esoteric forms of quantitative analysis and heteroscedasticity and all of that business, to me, that is a non-starter for using economics as a tool of analysis to address the issue that I am interested in, and that is racial inequality in American economic life. That is why, through my work, I have always emphasized the institutional economic approach, rooted in the University of Wisconsin, Commons, and Stigler, and others. John Dunlop at Harvard and other institutional economists. And I think that what I would like to see is NEA not being a toady to the economics profession with this overemphasis on mathematics and quantitative analysis and econometrics, the esoteric econometrics. What does that tell you about the problem of economic inequality in employment, income, and wealth? It doesn't tell you a hell of a lot, in my opinion. And so I would like to see more young economists, black economists, learn more about institutional economics as a tool of analysis rather than having this overemphasis on mathematics and quantitative analysis as a way of entering the economics profession.
You know, economists once held the role of being the queen of the social sciences, or the king of the social sciences, however you want to put it, in that we seem to have invited other disciplines to come into economics. If you go back to the starting of the earlier economists, many were psychologists. Many were weather people. But we found in some ways that economics, it has a broad framework in which to look at the behavior of people. And one of the things we have to stress as we move forward with the NEA, we want to encourage interdisciplinary thinking on the part of economists, because that's how we generate the next generation of economists. They generally come out of people who are in this interdisciplinary sphere that we're talking about.
Yes.
You know, I like to think today of finance. Those who are in economics today and started 50 years ago would have never gone into finance. You know, it was a subject of those who were in connection and who had the things to do and so on. But today, we find the MBA and the finance major and the finance scholar, such as we had at UCLA, which produced Nobel laureates in economics, okay? We are an interdisciplinary group. We're born from that essence. We should continue that. My joy of being an economist is not ever taking myself serious as an economist, but taking myself serious as one who understood economists and seriously knew how to make what economists had on the table, brilliant ideas, make them work for my community. We have to teach kids coming in, particularly black kids, that economics is a pathway to become a professional and go into problem solving. You don't have to go into economics for a PhD, but if you go in as an undergraduate and hang around economists and pick up a master's or get in a collection of research and so on, and then go to law school, I guarantee you, your focus is going to be in economics somewhere. So what we have to encourage as NEA is the interdisciplinary push that we have to have with all of our kids. We can't say, I want you to be an economist, and the first thing they say, well, I don't understand the mathematics. That's not where we want to go. We want them to think about problem solving, social problem solving. We have the tools, more so than any other discipline, to engage in social problem solving. It was the joy that I had pushing the calculators, doing least squares for Robert Ferber, who was the father of marketing. He was an economist who decided he was going to make the consumer behavior the heart of what he wanted to do. I enjoyed being in these bureaus who were concerned about pushing businesses. They weren't concerned about the economics. Anybody who was an economist would come in there and talk like they wanted them to talk. Then you could get into forecasting and all the things you want to be. We are the sort of like the baseline disciplines of dealing with social problems, wherever you go. And I think we ought to encourage other social science students who have an interest in what we would call economic issues to join us in NEA in workshops. I would like to see workshops that we sponsor. I would like to see us go. We're sitting on, in LA now, something like $150 million, more than that, to do housing. We're hung up on political issues. But I'm looking at it, I see some economic issues there in the planning and putting that stuff together. We need people who want to solve problems to come in to NEA and bite into the apple that we call economists, with the understanding that we can still eat that apple, eat as much of it as we want to, and we can go another discipline. And that will strengthen us as a leading institution of developing young people. And we got to have that base to build a base of, quote, professional economists. We draw from people who have an interest in economics, and they have a narrow interest in the subject of economics, the power of the subject. So we got to embrace both of those as we go forward. That's my thoughts.
Let me begin by saying how happy I am to see so many people of color in the room today. And it's especially good to have people who have served the organization throughout the 50 years we have been in existence. And we're very fortunate in having some from the very beginning. But it's also great to have the most recent generations of Black economists with us as well. The days when Marcus Alexis and Carl Gregory fell into each other's arms because they were so excited to see another Black economist at the annual meeting are hopefully behind us for good. This turnout is a tribute to the hard work of the planning committee who wrote, emailed, and called people to get them here today, and to see how many people from all the different eras of the organization is just a tribute and a testament to how much work they put into it.
The NEA has kind of been part of my career development. Even when I was a graduate student at Howard University, they were there from the inception and really helped guide and kind of promote what are some of the interests that I have. And then when I was able to become assistant professor, they were there to help mentor me through this whole process.
So my first people were Margaret Sims, who then said I had to know Barbara Jones and Charles Betsy, and also Waleed took me under wing. In fact, they were the ones who suggested that I apply for the NEA Federal Reserve Board dissertation fellowship, which I did, and I received, and so that kind of just immediately I was in the whole movement and the whole group, and everybody embraced me.
I would like to thank the 5 founders in the room: C.Z. Wilson, Carl Gregory, Thad Spratlin, Dick America, and Bernie Anderson. I'm not done. As well as Marcus Alexis and Bob Vowles, who are no longer with us, And I want to thank them for supporting me, promoting my work, and prodding me to serve on various NEA and AEA boards and committees.
The enduring legacy of what NEA has accomplished is all of the contributions. If you look at where economics would be on issues of race, matter of fact, the whole economics of racism, I think, wouldn't be where it is today if you didn't have the collective contributions from the Review of Black Political Economy and contributors to it.
If NEA can really focus on keeping and stimulating the interest in economics and finance at the undergraduate level, and primarily securing these undergraduate degree granting programs, I think that'll be a big help in terms of moving forward in the next 50 years.
I'm an activist by heart, and I grew from this experience. And I'm extremely proud. With this movement, we changed the whole American Economic Association. We changed it. But I think we have to keep running hard, kicking butt, and move forward. Thank you.
I want to say that all that the NEA has accomplished in 50 years has been because we've stood on the shoulders of giants. I have one word to describe the NEA. It is love.
We have an obligation to continue to address the challenge of race in the American economic profession. When you're in a position and you have a little power and influence, I have always been committed to use these positions to advance the race. So I would congratulate you, those of you who have been working in this organization. Continue, keep your foot on the pedal. The challenge is great, the responsibility is clear. We can do it, we will do it. I won't be around the next 50 years. But you will be here, and this organization will continue to have a great impact on the opportunities for black people